Good morning, friends. We're in Genesis chapter 7 today, so go ahead and grab a Bible, open it up to Genesis 7. If you came this morning and didn't bring a Bible, as you don't have one, in translation that you can read or understand, grab one of those blue Bibles and open it up. Genesis is the first book of the Bible, and you want to go to chapter 7. I want to thank all of you for braving the great blizzard of 2020 and coming and being a part of our worship service today. Truly blessed by your sacrifice and glad that we could worship together. So I had this really great illustration about the power of water that involved me being at the beach, and then God gave us all a great illustration of the power of water this week, didn't He? And so if you live anywhere in or around this area, you witnessed exactly the sheer power that water can wield in a small amount compared to the amount we're getting ready to read about, right? And so, there is something about water that reminds us as humans of our powerlessness before the will of God. And I think it's always meant to be that way, but this story really hammers that home for us in so many different ways. We saw it, it invades everywhere. It goes wherever it wishes. It creates new places. If you go up to, I don't know the name of the road, everybody calls it Hog Pen Alley, but if you go up there, Hog Pen Alley, you can see places where the water has literally just carved new spots because there was so much water that it's just created new channels because it is powerful. And all of that, the interesting thing is how easy it is for us to forget the power of God, because we can look at water and what it can do to some dirt and be amazed at the power of water, and yet the God who made the water is infinitely more powerful and infinitely more capable. And the very root of our sinfulness is the fact that we just fail to remember that this sovereign God has dictated how we are to live our lives. He's dictated how we ought to be, not just because He's a dictator, but because that's what's best for us. And then we decide to try to act in our own sovereignty, which is exactly what happens in Genesis chapter 7. And the next thing you know, there's water. Right? God will not be mocked forever. We talked about last week the fact that we've made this into a cutesy story, and it's not that way at all in the Bible. It's intended to be for us a picture of a couple of things, but one is just the sovereign power of God. Second is the consequences of sinfulness. And third is the promise of God. And so today what I want us to look at as we read this chapter is this picture of a God who delivers on the promises that He has made. So you remember chapter before, last week, He's talking to Noah and he says, I'm going to give you the condensed version, Noah, build a big boat because I'm getting ready to destroy the whole world with rain. And God commands Noah, and Noah did all that God commanded him, which we see as a rarity happening in the Scriptures, right? I mean, up until this point, you've got Enoch who walks with God, and he was not. But generally speaking, no one does all that God has commanded him. Noah obeys, and now Genesis 7 happens. This whole story is about God. So again, as we read chapter 7, read it looking for the Lord. Okay? When you read the Old Testament, we don't read the Old Testament just looking for cool stories. The stories are amazing. But they're amazing because God is amazing. He's the character that we're after when we read Genesis 7. So we're going to start Genesis chapter 7, starting in verse 6. And here's what it says. Noah was 600 years old when the flood of waters came upon the earth. And Noah and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him went into the ark to escape the waters of the flood, of clean animals, and of animals that are not clean, and of birds, and of everything that creeps on the ground, two and two, male and female, went into the ark with Noah, as God had commanded Noah. And after 7 days, the waters of the flood came upon the earth. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, on the 17th day of the month, on that day, all the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heavens were opened, and rain fell upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. On the very same day, Noah and his sons, Shem, and Ham and Japheth, and Noah's wife, and the 3 wives of his sons with them entered the ark, they and every beast according to its kind, and all the livestock according to their kind, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth according to its kind, and every bird according to its kind, every winged creature. They went into the ark with Noah, 2 and 2 of all flesh, in which there was the breath of life. And those that entered, male and female of all flesh, went in as God had commanded him. And the Lord shut him in. The flood continued 40 days on the earth. The waters increased and bore up the ark, and it rose high above the earth. The waters prevailed and increased greatly on the earth, and the ark floated on the face of the waters. And the waters prevailed so mightily on the earth that all the high mountains under the whole heaven were covered. The waters prevailed above the mountains, covering them 15 cubits deep, and all flesh died that moved on the earth, birds, livestock, beasts, all swarming creatures that swarm on the earth, and all mankind. Everything on the dry land in whose nostrils was the breath of life died. He blotted out every living thing that was on the face of the ground, man, animals, and creeping things, and birds of the heavens. They were blotted out from the earth. Only Noah was left, and those who were with him in the ark. And the waters prevailed on the earth for 150 days. Let's pray together. Father, would we not take lightly something like this that is so serious, so heavy? Father, I pray that in a very fresh, very new way in our own hearts, that the weight, the judgment that you bring upon sinners would be felt by us, so that we might be even more grateful for the rescue that Christ has provided. Help us to see you and to see your Son Jesus through this story today, we pray. In Jesus' name, amen. So last week we talked about the faith of Noah and how to live out our faith in a fallen world. This week we're going to see that God delivers. One of the reasons that we can trust the promises of God is because God will always deliver promises. Now we, as New Testament believers, believe that all of those promises have been delivered because Christ has come and done what was promised. Noah's looking forward to see the promises that will be fulfilled. We are looking at the fulfilled promises and expecting the return of Jesus, who's promised that he will return again. And we can know that he will because God always follows through. He always does what he has promised. And some of the ways we can know that he does this is because God has a plan. Honestly, at the very beginning, the first thing that we can see about this whole thing is the idea that God has a sovereign plan that he will work out the way he has spelled out. So we look at everything that happens here in this chapter. Everything that God has promised is coming to pass. Everything that God has said is going to happen is happening. The animals are obeying, right? God is speaking, the animals are coming. God will preserve each of the type of the animals, each of kind of animals that he has made, and the animals will follow his command. You know, the book of Job, if you sit down and read the book of Job, one of the most amazing parts about Job is when God starts to speak and he gives a picture of his sovereignty over everything, including Job's suffering. He starts to talk about the dominion that he has over all of the animals. The great animals of the deep, the Leviathan, we talked about Leviathan in Sunday school today. The Leviathan, the behemoth, all these things. God just has sovereign control of them. He's in Job, he's talking about the fact that he controls when the goats give birth. Like that's all according to God's sovereign plan. We see that happening in the New Testament with Jesus, right? When Jesus is teaching us not to worry, what does he say? He says, "Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? And not one of them will fall to the ground apart from your Father." God executes his plan and demonstrates his sovereign control over everything that he has made, including the animals. But it's not just the animals, it's the weather. The water obeys. God speaks, water happens. And it really is sort of that simple. The waters are moving at the voice of God. It's hard for us to reconcile in our minds when we see tragedy happen as a result of the weather, that God is sovereign over the weather. But here's the conclusion that we have to come to. In the universe, someone has to be sovereign. And though we may not always understand, and we should not minimize the negative impact that weather can have, I mean, we see it happening right here, right, with Noah. It still happens according to the plan of God. It's an easier thing to say in some circumstances than it is in others, but you're only left with a couple of conclusions that you have to come to. Either God is sovereign or He's not. The not creates a whole lot more problems than the sovereign does. And so we rest in the fact that even in the midst of this, He has a plan. We see this again happening in the life of Jesus. Can you think of a time in the life of Jesus where you see Him exercising sovereignty over the weather? Right? He is on the boat taking a nap. Disciples are freaking out because the weather's terrible. They're in the middle of the lake. They walk up to Jesus and they ask probably the third dumbest question they ever asked Jesus. Master, don't you care that we are perishing? Like, He literally came because they are perishing. The whole reason Jesus came to earth is because they are perishing. And so they ask, well, don't you care that we're perishing? So what does He do? He gets up and he speaks to the weather like it's an impetuous child and just says, hush! And the weather just stops. You remember what they say? Who is this that can command the winds and the waves? Friends, we have in the picture of the Scriptures a God who is sovereign over the weather. God has a plan. And even bad weather is a part of His plan. Even when there's 14 inches of water in your basement. He has a plan. There's a lot of amens going around. Like, we all realize this, right? The hard part for us is that plan. We can't see all the intricate parts of it as it works together, right? But even those things are part of it. And then we see Noah obeying. So everything here is working in obedience with the command of God. And that's extremely rare in the Scriptures, and so we need to really pay close attention. It doesn't happen very often. It happens all the time that the animals obey. It happens all the time that the weather obeys. The problem is with us. The problem is that we don't very often obey. We're the only creatures in the universe that have the nerve to decide to disobey God. Everything else operates in obedience in accord to His will. Just us. We're the only ones that are arrogant and foolish enough to decide to run against the will of God other than the angels, the fallen angels. And so you see this picture of Noah being obedient. So verse 10 always trips me out. I've read this a bunch this week, and I just love this verse. Okay, so you've got verse 9, 2 and 2, male and female, went into the ark with Noah as God commanded Noah. Now listen to this. And after 7 days, the waters of the flood came upon the earth. So you get this picture. Everybody's gathered. They're all in the boat. And they're just sitting there waiting for rain for 7 days. That's a long time. I've got to think. So as I'm thinking about this, first off, the difficulty of just obeying the promises of God. You've seen the animals. Everybody's on board. And now you're just sitting here waiting. It's just 7 days of just sitting in the boat waiting for it to rain while your sons are saying, I thought you said it was going to rain. It's not raining. What's rain? It's not raining. I don't see anything. He's waiting and continuing to be obedient and continuing to sit on the boat, and then God brings the rain. Isn't it interesting? Still part of His sovereign plan. I mean, totally, God could have just, the moment that everybody gets on the boat, rain just happens. That's totally how He could have done it, but it's not how He chose to do it. The way He chose to do it was everything to work on His time in accordance to His pleasure. And that is the most difficult part about being a Christian, isn't it? Is that God is not beholden to our timetable. He does not operate according to our whims. He doesn't move when we want Him to move. He moves when He moves. And we are called to submit ourselves to His will, not vice versa. We often think the Christian life would be much easier if God would just do things the way we tell Him to do them. And we forget a couple of things that are easy to forget, and we know they're easy to forget because we've been forgetting them since Genesis chapter 3. Number one is that you're not God. Right? Number two is that your plan, what's going on in your life is intricately woven into every other thing that's happening according to the purposes and pleasure of God. We often think of life as these individual strands of lives that are just happening independent of one another. But that's not, especially if you're a Christian. It's true for everyone, but it's especially true if you're a Christian. You have no idea how many number of things are happening in your life right now simply so that someone else can experience something. There's the interdependent nature of life together. It's happening. And sometimes we simply just have to trust that God has a plan. And His plan will come to pass. And we know, because we read Romans, it's one of the least helpful verses in times of great tragedy, right? But it's a comfort in the long run. We know all things work together to those who are called according to His purpose, right? But that doesn't mean the good that will happen, doesn't mean that good's going to happen here, does it? The good is knowing that we will be in the presence of Christ. And it's knowing that everything that's happening in our life, even the greatest and darkest of tragedies, somehow will end up working to the glorious good of God accomplishing His sovereign plan. It's how we could sing a song like, though you slay me, yet I will praise you. It's how Job could say that. You know, it's easy to look at me and say, well, that's easy for you to say. You haven't experienced what I've experienced. No, Job experienced it. Jesus experienced it. They said it. I'm just quoting what they said. And either it's true or it's not true. But we have to trust that if it's in the Scriptures, if it's written that way, this is what God has said, it must be true. This is what we mean when we refer to God as Almighty. Almighty means Almighty. Sovereign. And we're okay with the sovereignty of God until it runs roughshod against our sovereignty, and then we have a problem. But someone in the universe must be sovereign. And I praise God that it's not you or me. Him. We have to rest in His plan. That's our comfort. What is your comfort when you feel like everything is spinning out of control? You ever had that moment? You ever had that time where you literally just feel like the wheels have fallen off the bus and everything is spinning out of control? What is your hope? Not that you're going to get it back together. Not that things are going to work out again the way you've designed them to. That is a recipe for anxiety. So much anxiety in our lives would be solved if we would simply remind ourselves that we are not in control. He is. He is sovereign. And it doesn't matter how you try to orchestrate the circumstances. You will not frustrate the plan of God. You will only continue to frustrate yourself. He has a plan. And He's going to work the plan. And it's going to come out and it's going to be glorious. In the meantime, we live in a broken world and we have to deal with brokenness. It is still somehow a part of His plan. He's not responsible, nor is He the author of sin. But nothing happens that frustrates the plan of God. There is this very difficult tension that you've got to work out in your mind that the Bible makes clear. He has a plan. That's our comfort. The reality is, often when we feel like things are spinning outside of control, they're really just spinning outside of our control. The reality of the fact is you were never in control to begin with. Let's talk for a moment about this week. Think about the power of water. We can go to great lengths to keep water out of our basement. Do all kinds of clever and great things, but at the end of the day, if there's enough water, there is water in your basement, whether you want it there or not. So many things. It doesn't mean we live inactively. We live very actively. We actively make decisions. We actively move forward. We actively do things, but we do so holding on to them loosely. So many good things God is working and is happening require us to rest in His working. Sometimes you may be trying to do things that He's just aren't going to happen. And that's okay. He has a plan. And that's really the promise of Genesis 7. We see this. He will execute what He will do, what He has said He is going to do. And He tells Noah, it's going to flood. And guess what happens? It floods. And that water prevails. So we see the scope here of the promised judgment of God in this chapter. Now there's a ton of questions that I'm going to answer very briefly, but I'm more than willing to answer after the service that we could talk through about this. But verse 19, I think, gives us the bottom line. Here's what verse 19 says. The waters prevailed so mightily on the earth that all the high mountains under the whole heaven were covered. So now I'm going to tell you what I think this means. Okay, you ready? Here's what I think this means. I think this means that all the high mountains under the whole heaven were covered. Okay, that took me all week. Right there. Let me explain what I mean by that. There's a ton of questions. So the question might be, well, do you think that the whole world was covered with water? To which I would say, all the high mountains under the heavens were covered. Everybody? Okay, so probably answers a ton of other questions. Here's the reality, man. We can ask all sorts of questions that we're just never going to find the answers to. The Bible gives us the answers that we're supposed to have, and I really believe that the answer that we're supposed to have is that all the high mountains under the heavens were covered. If Moses had wanted us to have more explanation than that, you know what would have happened? He'd have put it in the book. But instead, he put in the book that all the high mountains under the heavens were covered. Right? The flood was big. It covered all the high mountains under the heavens. The world was covered. So there's a couple of things that's important to understand. I make light of this, but I want you to get why I believe what I believe. I believe what I believe because the Bible says that. Okay, everybody got me? All right, so the flood was history. In other words, it really happened. I believe that you have to believe that there was an actual, for real, historic flood because the Bible believed that there was an actual, real, historic flood. Somebody in the worship team read the passage from 2 Peter, right? Yeah, okay, awesome, well done. So the passage in 2 Peter, what did Peter believe? Did he believe there was a real flood? Yes. Right. What did Jesus believe? Did Jesus believe there was a real flood? Yes. What did Moses believe? Did Moses believe there was a real flood? Yes. So then you got to come to terms with what you believe. Either the Bible is the central thing and everything we believe is based on what the Bible teaches, or you got to go some other direction. I don't like the other direction. The Bible teaches that the flood really happened. And so we have to believe that the flood really happened. God has revealed Himself through His Word. And the reality of it is, if it's a stretch for you to believe that all the high mountains under the heavens were covered with water, then it's probably also a stretch for you to believe that God said, light, and light happened from nothing. It's a stretch for you to believe that God said, earth, universe, planets, stars, and He spoke, and from nothing, all of that happened. It's a stretch for you to believe that Jesus, somehow the Son of God, could take on the form of flesh and be fully God and fully man at the same time, and then die, and then raise from the dead, because none of us has ever seen that before, and then ascend into the heavens. You got to pick which miracles you're uncomfortable with, and I don't want to do that. I want to take the whole thing, because I think the whole thing is actually the Word of God. And that includes the flood. It was actual historical event. And it was universal. The flood covered the whole earth. What it says over and over again, that everything died. And in order for all and everything to die, the flood had to go everywhere. It covers the whole world. When we get to that section, we're supposed to read it and feel the weight, right? All flesh died that moved on the earth. Birds, livestock, beasts, all swarming creatures that swarm on the earth, and all mankind. Everything on the dry land in whose nostrils was the breath of life died. Everything. It covered the whole earth. The flood covered the whole earth in the same way that the curse covered the whole earth. All the world was poisoned because of Adam's terrible decision. And all of humanity is poisoned because of Adam's terrible decision. And therefore, God executed judgment on everyone except for Noah so that he would keep his promise and that Christ would come and redeem humanity. It was universal and it was catastrophic. Verse 22, everything on the dry land in whose nostrils was the breath of life died. What a tragedy. That the sinfulness of men could reach the point that God executed judgment on every single person except one family. There has been no catastrophe since that has matched this. This is why Moses actually spends more time on the flood than he does on the creation of the entire universe. Until the death of Christ, there had been and would be no greater tragedy. Greatest tragedy that's ever happened in the world is that we would kill the sinless Son of God, that we would put him to death. Up until that point, Noah, the destruction of everything with breath in it. We're supposed to get to the end of this story and lament. But the lament is not that God would destroy the earth. The lament is that we would be so rebellious that the sin that we tolerate in our own lives could actually reach such proportion that it deserves the wrath and judgment of God. Like we're supposed to look at this and go, this is how serious sin is. God takes sin seriously. You can't get to the end of the story of the flood and not come away with the idea that God takes sin seriously. And so the question is, why don't we? We assume on the grace of God. We assume on our salvation and then try to somehow continue to sin so that grace may increase. And this is what Paul asked, right? Should we sin so that grace may abound? And then he says, no way, Jose. Absolutely not. Of course not. What a ridiculous thing to believe. And yet we live that way. We continue to sin because we fail to see the seriousness of our sin. What sin is it that you tolerate in your life? What sin is it that you're just, it's not a huge deal. I mean, it's probably in the Bible that I shouldn't do that. It's not a really big deal. Read this chapter and tell me how big of a deal it is. And then, Christian, go to the cross and see what it means for Christ to bear the wrath of God on your behalf. The gratefulness for Jesus taking on the wrath so that my life would be spared leads me to a life of obedience. Or it's supposed to. We're supposed to take sin seriously because God takes sin seriously. So in the end, we see the judgment of God, but we also see His clear mercy. Right? He had every right to wipe the whole thing out and spare no one. We think God unfair because He destroyed all of His enemies, preserved Noah. We ought to think God gracious because He preserved Noah. Because in preserving Noah, we live and have eternal life. Because in the end, all humanity is spared because one man is spared. Noah is spared by God. He was righteous, but it was not his righteousness that saved him. It was God's mercy. It was God's grace that saves Noah. And we all live now because Noah lived. But check this out. In Noah, one man is spared, and so all men who live now live because that one man is spared. In Christ, who is not spared, but took on the wrath of God, everyone who would live after, who would repent and believe the gospel, has eternal life through him. So Noah was spared so that men could live. Jesus was not spared so that men could live. He took on the wrath of God. Instead of God destroying the whole world with water again, what he does is all of the wrath of God is put on to Christ. That's why we can't assume on grace. That's why we ought not assume on grace. Because what happens is not just Jesus forgives you. Like we've boiled the gospel down to Jesus will forgive you of your sins. No. Don't cheapen the gospel. The gospel is that Jesus took on the wrath of God. This wrath of God that destroyed everything that had breath of life in it. That wrath put full bore onto the Son of God so that all who would come after, who would repent and believe, might have eternal life. And when we start to think about grace rightly, truly, we've got this automatic thing, this automatic answer dispenser that happens in our mind when we're in church long enough. And what we do is we say, what is grace? And I put in my question, and what comes out on the bottom is unmerited favor. Right? That's what we learn. Okay, let's start thinking about what that means. It's just so much more profound than that. That's a fine place to start, but it's a bad place to finish. Sure, it's unmerited. Why? Because you are a wretched sinner, vile, wretched sinner, disgusting before the presence of God and deserving the eternal wrath of God. And yet, God in His infinite mercy has put that wrath of God onto Jesus so that you would be spared, not just spared, but changed, a new creature, a new creation, who could actually live in righteousness and worship Him and do what you were designed to do in the first place. He has given all of that to you in exchange for all of the wrath that you deserve. So, we take sin seriously. Because we believe that He has made good on His promises, that He will promise, but that He has promised. And in that promised Christ, we see the eternal plan of God to save sinners. We see the wrath of God put onto Jesus so that we would be spared. And we see the mercy of God in that anyone who would turn from their sin and trust in the Lord will be saved. So we read this chapter, seeing His wrath, thinking seriously about His wrath. We ought not be afraid to talk about the judgment of God. Because if people don't know what they're being saved from, it's very difficult to understand the concept of being saved. Being saved from drowning makes a lot more sense to me when I'm in a pool and I can't swim. What we must do is remind people, and be reminded, that we were completely unable to save ourselves and that death and judgment awaited us. But God is rich in mercy. And He has given us, through His Son, the opportunity for eternal life if we will repent and believe the gospel. He didn't spare Jesus so that we would be spared. If you're here, you're listed off Facebook, you are not a Christian. There will be a day where you will face the wrath of God, but it will be so much more than water. We believe that it's a real and eternal state called hell. But today, you have such an opportunity to receive His mercy. If you hear this and it makes sense to you, and you're now saying, I need this, I want this, all you have to do is turn from your sin and trust in Christ and be spared. For the Christian, for the one who has said, I've done all that, then live in righteousness, because you've been set free by the one who bore the wrath of God. Live that way. The person who's in anxiety, the anxious person, think about this. God